So, liebe Freunde, willkommen zurück und wir beschäftigen uns jetzt mit einem weiteren extrem wichtigen Thema und zwar mit dem Killer Nummer 1. Er ist weltweit verbreitet und schadet Millionen, wenn nicht sogar Milliarden von Menschen und das täglich. Dieser Killer hat unzählige Menschenleben auf dem Gewissen und führt zu jeder Menge Krankheiten. Die Rede ist natürlich vom Stress.
What am I thinking about? Mortgage. Damn it. Money pouring out. But I felt a lump. I know cancer when I feel it. Where is she? What is she up to? Never calling, never saying a word.
Stress. It is everyone's inferno, bedeviling our minds, igniting our nights, upending our equilibrium. But it hasn't always been so. Once, its purpose was to save us.
If you're a normal mammal, what stress is about is 3 minutes of screaming terror on the savannah, after which it's either over with or you're over with.
But everything changed. What once helped us survive has now become the scourge of our lives.
And I just burst into tears. And wept. And wept.
Today, scientific discoveries in the field
Got him.
and in the lab prove that stress is not a state of mind, but something measurable and dangerous.
This is not an abstract concept. It's not something that maybe someday you should do something about. You need to attend to it today.
In some of the most unexpected places, scientists are revealing just how lethal stress can be.
Chronic stress could do something as unsubtle and grotesque as kill some of your brain cells.
The impact of stress can be found deep within us, shrinking our brains, adding fat to our bellies, even unraveling our chromosomes.
This is real. This is not just somebody whining.
Stress, savior, tyrant, plague. Its portrait revealed.
Aber was ist Stress überhaupt? Woher kommt der Stress? Was macht der Stress in unserem Körper? Wie kann man Stress vermeiden? Und diese Fragen werden wir jetzt anhand dieser Doku mal näher aufarbeiten. Und da wären wir bei meinem Lieblingspsychologielehrer, und zwar wären wir dann Professor Robert Sapolsky. Der Sapolsky ist ein wahnsinnig guter Professor, weil er es schafft, ohne Fachchinesisch und ohne komplizierte Erklärungen Dinge einfach und easy den Studenten näher zu bringen. Wer sich für Psychologie interessiert, der Sapolsky hat 25 Lectures auf YouTube hochgeladen von der Stanford-Uni und der Typ kann wirklich wahnsinnig gut erklären. Eins seiner Bücher bzw. eins seiner Fachgebiete ist der Stress. Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers oder auf Deutsch, warum Zebras keine Magenschwüre bekommen, ist nicht nur medizinisch, psychologisch ein unfassbar wichtiges Buch. Nein, auch für die Gesellschaft ist dieses Buch einfach unerlässlich, weil es eindrucksvoll zeigt, was chronischer Stress für schädliche Konsequenzen für eine Gesellschaft hat.
Stanford University neurobiologist Robert Sapolsky has been advancing our understanding of stress, how it impacts our bodies, and how our social standing can make us more or less susceptible. For a few weeks every year or so, Sapolsky shifts his lab to a place more than 9,000 miles away on the plains of the Masai Mara Reserve in Kenya, East Africa. Robert Sapolsky first came to Africa over 30 years ago on a hunch. He suspected he could find out more about human stress and disease by looking at non-humans. And he knew just the non-humans.
You live in a place like this, you're a baboon, and you only have to spend about 3 hours a day getting your calories. And if you only have to work 3 hours a day, you got 9 hours of free time every day to devote to making somebody else just miserable. They're not being stressed by lions chasing them all the time. They're being stressed by each other. They're being stressed by social and psychological tumult invented by their own species. They're a perfect model for westernized stress-related disease.
To determine just what toll stress was taking on their bodies, Sapolsky wanted to look inside these wild baboons at the cellular level for the very first time. To do this, he would have to take their blood in the most unassuming way.
Basically, what you're trying to do is anesthetize a baboon without him knowing it's coming. Because you don't want to have any of this anticipatory stress. So you can't just, get in your Jeep and chase the baboon up and down the field for 3 hours and finally, when he's winded, dart him with an anesthetic. Now, the big advantages of a blowgun are that it's pretty much silent and it hasn't a whole lot in the way of moving parts, but the big drawback is it doesn't go very far. So what you spend just a bizarre amount of time doing is trying to figure out how to look nonchalant around a baboon. Got him. Time. Okay, he is wobbling now. Okay, whoop, here he goes.
From each baboon blood sample, Robert measured levels of hormones central to the stress response.
Well, to make sense of what's happening in your body, you've got these two hormones that are the workhorses of the whole stress response. One of them, we all know, adrenaline, American version epinephrine. The other is a less known hormone called glucocorticoids. It comes out of the adrenal gland along with adrenaline. And these are the two backbones of the stress response.
That stress response and those two hormones are critical to our survival.
Because what stress is about is somebody is very intent on eating you, or you are very intent on eating somebody, and there's an immediate crisis going on.
When you run for your life, basics are all that matter. Lungs work overtime to pump mammoth quantities of oxygen into the bloodstream. The heart races to pump that oxygen throughout the body, so muscles respond instantly.
You need your blood pressure up to deliver that energy. You need to turn off anything that's not essential. Growth, reproduction, you're running for your life. This is no time to ovulate. Tissue repair, all that sort of thing. Do it later if there is a later.
When the zebra escapes, its stress response shuts down. But human beings can't seem to find their off switch.
We turn on the exact same stress response for purely psychological states, thinking about the ozone layer, the taxes coming up, mortality, 30-year mortgages. We turn on the same stress response, and the key difference there is we're not doing it for a real physiological reason, and we're doing it non-stop.
Das war mal früher eine extrem wichtige Funktion des Körpers, aber ich sag mal so, dass jetzt ein Löwe kommt und wir dringend abhauen müssen oder andere lebensbedrohliche Situationen geschehen ja im Alltag, sag ich mal, selten bis gar nicht. Klar hast du mal eine Schlägerei oder irgendwie sowas, wo du abhauen musst oder wo du irgendwie verteidigen musst, aber das sind Sachen, die kommen extrem selten vor. Aber diese Stressreaktion, dieses Pumpen von Glucocorticoids oder von Adrenalin ins System, in den Körper, das passiert bei jedem kleinen Stressfaktor. Ob wir jetzt Angst davor haben, in der Öffentlichkeit zu reden, ob wir Angst davor haben, unseren Job zu verlieren, Existenzangst, Geldsorgen, ob wir Angst haben, an irgendeiner Krankheit zu erkranken, wie Corona zum Beispiel oder Krebs oder was auch immer. Das alles löst dieselbe Stressreaktion aus, als wenn ich jetzt einen Löwe sehen würde. Wenn ich mich aber von Corona stressen lasse, macht diese Stressreaktion, dieses entweder kämpfen oder fliehen, macht keinen Sinn. Ich kann Corona nicht physisch bezwingen und ich kann von Corona nicht weglaufen. Das ist absolut hirnrissig. Aber der Körper pumpt trotzdem Adrenalin und Glucocorticoids ins System rein. Das ist gerade auf Dauer extrem schädlich für den Körper. Jetzt ist es aber so, dass nicht nur die reale Bedrohung, sag ich mal, ein Löwe oder Angst vor Arbeitsplatzverlust oder Geldsorgen eine Person wirklich stressen, sondern auch der Gedanke. Allein der Gedanke daran löst dieselbe Stressreaktion aus. Das heißt, ich muss noch nicht mal real von Corona oder von Krebs oder von anderen Krankheiten oder vom Arbeitsplatzverlust bedroht werden. Allein der Gedanke, dass ich ja vielleicht Corona bekommen könnte oder vielleicht Krebs bekommen könnte, der reicht schon aus, auszulösen. Das heißt, unsere Gedanken, wie wir über Dinge denken, hat physische Auswirkungen auf unseren Körper und ist somit extrem wichtig. Jetzt gibt es ein paar Möglichkeiten, wie man diesen Stress runterfahren kann.
So then, if you wanted to create a new personal reality, a new life, you'd have to change your personality, which means you'd have to start thinking about what you've been thinking about and change it. You'd have to become aware of your unconscious habits and behaviors and even what you say and modify them. And then you'd have to look at those emotions that keep you anchored to the past and decide if those emotions belong in your future. So most people try to create a new personal reality as the same personality, and it doesn't work. We literally have to become someone else. In other words, thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates a state of being. So most people have experiences in their life that brand them emotionally. They feel fear, they feel anger, they feel bitterness, they feel frustration, they feel insecurity. And those emotions then become part of their identity. So once they think certain thoughts that turn on certain circuits in their brain that are equal to their insecurity, and then they feel insecure. The moment they feel insecure, they think more insecure thoughts, which makes more chemicals for them to feel insecure. And the repetition of that cycle over time conditions the body to subconsciously become the mind of insecurity. So then the person says, I am insecure. And whenever you say, I am anything, you're commanding your mind and body towards a destiny. So then most people's biology is, for the most part, their past. And so if you're not being defined by the vision of the future, some new possibility in your life, you're only left with the old circuitry in your brain and the old emotions of the past. So the question then is, can you believe in a future that you can't see or experience with your senses yet, but you've thought about enough times in your mind that your brain is literally changed to look like the experience has already occurred? Now, the latest research in neuroscience says you can change your brain just by thinking. So then, as you begin to think about a new possibility, and your brain begins to fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations, and you begin to plan your behaviors, and you begin to review in your mind, mentally rehearse who you're going to be in your life, the mere action of mental rehearsal begins to install the neurological circuits in your brain. Now your brain is no longer a record of the past. Now it's in fact a map to the future. And if you were then to begin to emotionally embrace your future before it's made manifest, in other words, you're not waiting for your healing to feel wholeness. You're not waiting for your new relationship to feel love. You're not waiting for the mystical moment to feel awe. You're not waiting for your success to feel empowered. That's the old model of reality of cause and effect. In other words, the materialist, the person who's waiting for their wealth to come to feel abundance, they're living by that model of cause and effect. But the quantum model is about causing an effect, which means you begin to experience your own worthiness and your abundance before it occurs. You have to feel wholeness in order for your healing to occur. We have to feel love for ourselves and love for life in order for us to have love in our life. And so then to instruct people how to teach their body emotionally how that future could feel like before it's made manifest, if they do it properly, their body as the unconscious mind begins to believe it's living in that future reality in the present moment. And they're beginning to signal new genes in new ways that begins to change their body to look like the event has already occurred. So the process of change in the meditative model requires unlearning and relearning. It requires breaking the habit of the old self and reinventing a new self. What we say in neuroscience, pruning synaptic connections and sprouting new connections, unfiring and unwiring and refiring and rewiring, unmemorizing emotions that are stored in the body and then reconditioning the body to a new mind and to a new emotion, no longer signaling the same genes in the same way, but signaling new genes in new ways. Beginning to pull your energy out of the past and beginning to invest your energy into the future. What we're teaching people how to do is not to pray to have their prayers answered, but to get up from their meditations as if their prayers are already answered. Because when they're combining that clear intention of their future with that elevated emotion, they're literally changing their energy, They're changing their brain chemistry, they're changing the way their brain works, they're changing their genetic expression, they're changing their chemistry. They're literally becoming somebody else.
Jetzt gibt es ein paar Möglichkeiten, wie man diesen Stress runterfahren kann. Punkt Nummer 1, geteiltes Leid ist halbes Leid. Wenn man Freunde hat, Familie hat, mit denen man seinen Stress, seine Leiden teilen kann, wenn man darüber reden kann, dann geht es einem danach schon direkt viel, viel besser. Reden ist eigentlich immer gut. Das hilft immer. Punkt Nummer 2 ist Meditation. Und bei der Meditation denken ja immer viele, ja, da muss ich doch so ein Zen-Meister für sein, der irgendwie so langen Bart hat und 10 Stunden am Tag meditiert. Nein, meditieren ist wirklich ganz, ganz einfach. Wir haben ja gerade eben besprochen, dass die Gedanken irgendwann anfangen, uns so ein bisschen zu beherrschen. Und Meditation ist einfach nur der Prozess, sich von seinen Gedanken zu lösen. Macht mal eure Augen zu und zählt langsam bis 10 in eurem Kopf, ohne an irgendwas zu denken. Ihr werdet es sehr wahrscheinlich nicht schaffen, weil irgendein Gedanke ploppt immer hoch. Und Meditation ist einfach die Übung, sich allein auf den Atem zu konzentrieren und alles andere mal für ein paar Minuten auszuschalten. Ich würde jedem empfehlen, mal einfach ganz langsam anzufangen und 5 Minuten am Tag einfach nur mal zu sitzen oder zu liegen, ich liege die meiste Zeit, und nur mal auf seinen Atem zu achten. Das sind keine leeren Behauptungen, das ist alles wissenschaftlich belegt. Da gibt es unzählige Studien zu, es heißt dann da Mindfulness, aber ist das gleiche wie Meditieren. Ein weiterer Punkt, der bewiesenermaßen sehr hilfreich ist, ist die Selbstaffirmation. Und das ist so ein bisschen so der Blickwinkel auf die Probleme selber. Stellt euch mal vor, ihr habt Probleme mit eurem Chef. Euer Chef ist ein Psychopath, wie viele Chefs es nun mal sind, und der quält euch. Oder ihr habt scheiß Mitarbeiter, die euch schlecht behandeln. Jetzt kann es für viele Menschen hilfreich sein, sich jeden Tag vor Augen zu führen, was man denn trotzdem an guten Dingen in seinem Leben hat. Okay, der Chef ist scheiße und die Kollegen sind kacke, aber auf der anderen Seite habe ich noch eine Familie, die mich liebt. Ich habe Freunde, wo ich mich immer melden kann und die immer für mich da sind. Das heißt, dass wir nicht immer hier gucken nur, da ist alles scheiße, das ist alles kacke und es ist blöd. Nein, der Blick muss eher auf das Positive im Leben gerichtet sein. So, wir alle haben Sachen, wo wir sagen, ja, das fehlt mir und das habe ich nicht und da ist doch scheiße. Das macht uns immer nur weiter depressiv oder traurig. Wenn wir aber den Blick auf das richten, was wir haben, uns selbst affirmieren, das kann sehr hilfreich sein. Ich zum Beispiel, ich habe im Monat zur Verfügung 450 Euro um den Dreh. Ich habe kein Auto, ich habe keinen Fernseher, aber das ist mir scheißegal. Ich habe eine Familie, die ich über alles liebe, und ich habe Freunde, mit denen ich durch dick und dünn gehe. Wo ich immer weiß, wenn ich jetzt zu der und der Person hingehe, die hilft mir immer. Ich habe ein paar schöne Gesellschaftsspiele, mit denen spiele ich gerne. Ich habe ein Doppelkopfblatt, ich habe ein Fahrrad, ich habe einen gesunden Körper, ich kann laufen, ich kann sehen, ich kann mich bewegen. Das sind Sachen, die so wichtig sind, die wir aber über die Zeit für selbstverständlich halten. Wenn wir uns jeden Tag bewusst werden und sehen, dass diese Gesundheit und dieses Dach über dem Kopf, was zu essen, was zu trinken, wir haben Leitungswasser, was man trinken kann, aus dem Hahn. Ey, wie geil ist das denn? Das haben nicht viele Länder. Und wenn wir uns dessen immer wieder bewusst werden, dann merken wir, dass wir es eigentlich ziemlich gut haben. Deswegen mein Rat an euch, erstmal meditieren und zweitens nicht immer nur das sehen, das ist scheiße, das ist schlecht, scheiße hier, scheiße da. Nein, was habe ich denn alles? Was habe ich denn, was mir gut tut? Kennt ihr das Beispiel, da ist so ein Porsche-Fahrer und der guckt so nach oben in den Himmel und sieht so einen Helikopter fliegen und denkt sich dann so, boah, ich würde auch viel lieber fliegen jetzt. Dann ist da ein Smartfahrer, der den Porsche-Fahrer sieht und denkt sich, boah, ich würde viel lieber Porsche fahren. Dann kommt ein Fahrradfahrer und sieht den Smartfahrer und denkt sich, boah, ich würde viel lieber jetzt mit dem Auto fahren. Dann kommt ein Fußgänger, sieht den Fahrradfahrer und denkt sich, boah, ich würde jetzt viel lieber Fahrrad fahren. Dann kommt einer im Rollstuhl, sieht den Fußgänger und denkt sich, boah, ey, ich würde viel lieber laufen. Seht ihr das, was ich meine? Immer nach oben gucken, boah, das habe ich nicht und das will ich und das will ich und das ist doch, Mann. Immer den Blick auf das richten, was man hat, was einem gut tut. Und weiter geht's.
By not turning off the stress response when reacting to life's traffic jams, we wallow in a corrosive bath of hormones. Even though it's not life or death, we hyperventilate, our hearts pound, muscles tense.
Ironically, after a while, the stress response is more damaging than the stressor itself because the stressor is some psychological nonsense that you're falling for. No zebra on Earth running for its life would understand why fear of speaking in public would cause you to secrete the same hormones that it's doing at that point to save its life.
Stress is the body's way of rising to a challenge, whether the challenge is life-threatening, trivial, or fun.
You get the right amount of stress and we call it stimulation. The goal in life isn't to get rid of stress. The goal in life is to have the right type of stress, because when it's the right type, we love it. We jump out of our seats to experience it. We pay good money to get stressed that way. It tends to be a moderate stressor, where you got a stressor that's transient. It's not for nothing roller coaster rides are not 3 weeks long. And most of all, what they're about is you relinquish a little bit of control in a setting that overall feels safe.
But in real life, for so many of us primates, including Robert's baboons, control is not an option.
So you get some big male who loses a fight and chases a subadult who bites an adult female who slaps a juvenile who knocks an infant out of a tree, all in 15 seconds. So insofar as a huge component of stress is lack of control, lack of predictability, you're sitting there and you're just watching the zebra and somebody else is having a bad day and it's your rear end that's going to get slashed. So tremendously psychologically stressful for the folks further down on the hierarchy.
Und das ist bei uns Menschen leider genau das Gleiche. Zwei große Komponenten von Stress sind einmal, keine Kontrolle zu haben und zweitens, das nicht vorherzusehen. Nehmen wir als Beispiel den Arbeitsplatzverlust. Wenn ich gefeuert werde, habe ich darüber keine Kontrolle und oft ist es auch so, dass ich das gar nicht vorhersehen kann. Das macht Stress, das ist extrem stressig. Und wenn sich Stress im Körper aufbaut, also mit Glucocorticoids und Adrenalin, dann bauen sich auch Spannungen auf. Und diese Spannungen entladen sich irgendwann. Und dann ist es auch wie bei den Affen leider, dass diejenigen, die weiter höher stehen in der sozialen Hierarchie, dass die ihren Stress weitergeben an die Menschen, die unter einem stehen. Und die ganz unten stehen im System, das sind diejenigen, die am meisten leiden müssen.
One of Robert's early revelations was identifying the link between stress and hierarchy in baboons. Some baboon troops are over 100 strong. Like us, they have evolved large brains to navigate the complexities of large societies. Survival here requires a kind of baboon political savvy, with the most cunning and aggressive males gaining top rank and all the perks. Females for the choosing, all the food they can eat, and an endless retinue of willing groomers. Every male knows where he stands in society, who can torture him, whom he can torture, and who in turn the torturee can torture.
Well, this sounds like a terrible thing to confess after 30 years, but I don't actually like baboons all that much. I mean, there's been individual guys over the years who I absolutely love, but they're these schemy, backstabbing, Machiavellian bastards. They're awful to each other. So they're great for my science. I mean, I'm not out here to commune with them. They're perfect for what I study.
22 years ago, at the age of 30, Sapolsky's landmark research earned him the MacArthur Foundation's Genius Fellowship. His early work, measuring stress hormones from extracted blood, led to two remarkable discoveries. A baboon's rank determined the level of stress hormone in his system. So if you're a dominant male, you can expect your stress hormones to be low. And if you're submissive, much higher. But there was an even more revealing find. In Sapolsky's sample, low rankers, the have-nots, had increased heart rates and higher blood pressure. This was the first time anyone had linked stress to the deteriorating health of a primate in the wild.
Basically, if you're, a stressed, unhealthy baboon in a typical troop, high blood pressure, elevated levels of stress hormones, you have an immune system that doesn't work as well, your reproductive system is more vulnerable to being knocked out of whack, your brain chemistry is one that bears some similarity to what you see in clinically depressed humans, and all that stuff, those are not predictors of a hale and hearty old age.
As Robert Sapolsky was monitoring stress in baboons, Professor Sir Michael Marmot was leading a study in Great Britain that tracked the health of more than 28,000 people over the course of 40 years. It was named for Whitehall, citadel of the British Civil Service, where every job is ranked in a precise hierarchy.
Firstly, it showed that the lower you were in the hierarchy, the higher your risk of heart disease and other diseases. So people second from the top had higher risk than those at the top. People third from the top had higher risk than those second from the top. And it ran all the way from top to bottom. We're dealing with people in stable jobs with no industrial exposures. And yet, your position in the hierarchy intimately related to your risk of disease and length of life.
This particular study is sort of the Rosetta Stone of the whole field because it's the British civil service system. Everybody's got the same medical care. Everybody's got the same universal health care system, just like the baboons. All the baboons eat the same thing. They have the same level of activity. It's not the stuff that, if you're a low-ranking baboon, you smoke too much and you drink too much. And if you're a low-ranking British civil service guy, you never go to the doctor and you don't get preventative vaccines. Both of these studies rule out all those confounds, and they produce virtually identical findings.
On both sides of the primate divide, there are soul-wrenching stories and life-threatening consequences. For every subordinate like Kevin living a life of baboon uncertainty, there is an alpha strutting his stuff, glorying in power over someone else, someone unsuspecting, someone low-ranking. Research revealed that when stressed, the body begins shutting down all non-essential systems, including the immune system. And it became clear that if you shut down the immune system, stomach bacteria can run amok.
Because what the stress does is wipe out the ability of your body to begin to repair your stomach walls when they start rotting away from this bacteria.
For 2 decades, Dr. Carol Shively has been studying the arteries of macaques. Like baboons and British civil servants, these primates organize themselves into distinctly hierarchical groups and subject one another to social stress. Stress hormones can trigger an intense negative cardiovascular response, a pounding heart, and increased blood pressure. So if stress follows rank, would the cardiovascular system of a high-ranking macaque, call him a primate CEO, be different from his subordinate? When Shively looked at the arteries of a dominant monkey, one with little history of stress, its arteries were clean. But a subordinate monkey's arteries told a grim tale.
A subordinate artery has lots more atherosclerosis built up inside it than a dominant artery is.
Stress and the resulting flood of hormones had increased blood pressure, damaging artery walls, making them repositories for plaque.
So now when you feel threatened, your arteries don't expand and your heart muscle doesn't get more blood, and that can lead to a heart attack. This is not an abstract concept. It's not something that maybe someday you should do something about. You need to attend to it today because it's affecting the way your body functions. And stress today will affect your health tomorrow and for years to come.
Social and psychological stress, whether macaque, human, or baboon, can clog our arteries, restrict blood flow, jeopardize the health of our heart. And that's just the beginning of stress's deadly curse. As a PhD candidate at Rockefeller University in the early 80s, Sapolsky collaborated with his mentor, Dr. Bruce McEwen, to follow the path of stress into the brain. They subjected lab rats to chronic stress and then examined their brain cells. The team made an astonishing find. While the cells of normal rat brains have extensive branches, stressed rats' brain cells were dramatically smaller.
And what was most interesting in many ways was the part of the brain where this was happening, hippocampus. You take intro neurobiology anytime for the last 5,000 years, and what you learn is hippocampus is learning and memory.
Stress in these rats shrank the part of their brain responsible for memory.
Stress affects memory in two ways. Chronic stress can actually change brain circuits so that we lose the capacity to remember things as we need to. Very severe acute stress can have another effect, which is often we refer to as stress makes you stupid, which is making it impossible for you over short periods of time to remember things you know perfectly well.
We all know that phenomenon. We all know that one from back when we stressed ourselves by not getting any sleep at all, and the next morning at 9 o'clock, we couldn't remember a single thing for that final exam. You take a human and stress them big time, long time, and you're going to have a hippocampus that pays the price as well.
What we see is that the brains of dominant monkeys light up bright with lots of dopamine binding in this area that's so important to reward and feeling pleasure about life.
Shively then looked at the subordinate's brain.
What we discovered is that the brains of the subordinate monkeys are very, very dull because there's much less receptor binding going on in this area. Why is that? What is it about this area of the brain? When you have less dopamine, everything around you that you would normally take pleasure in is less pleasurable. So the sun doesn't shine so bright, the grass is not so green, food doesn't taste as good. It's because of the way your brain is functioning that you're doing that, and your brain's functioning that way because you're low on the social status hierarchy.
One feature of low rank is being low ranking, the reality. An even stronger feature by the time you get to humans is not just being low ranking or poor, it's feeling low ranking or poor. And one of the best ways for society to make you feel like one of the have-nots is to rub your nose over and over and over again with what you don't have.
Und wir leben nun mal auch eben in einer materialistischen Gesellschaft. Alle müssen irgendwie zeigen, was sie haben und wie reich sie sind und was für ein tolles Haus und ein toller Wagen. Und wenn du keinen Mercedes hast, dann bist du auch ein nächstes Statussymbol. Kauf dir das neue MacBook, kauf dir Freiheit, kauf dir dein Glück und all sowas. Ja, aber ist doch logisch, wenn ich jeden Tag höre, was ich nicht habe und was ich aber unbedingt noch brauche, weil es ja so wichtig und toll ist, ja, dann stresse ich mich doch voll selber. Und deswegen ist mein Tipp vom Nico Pich, Befreiung vom Überfluss. Man muss nicht immer alles neu haben. Man braucht nicht immer die neuen Nike, Air Max, Yeezy Shoes oder was auch immer. Man muss einfach mal lernen, mit dem zufrieden zu sein, was man hat. Glaubt es mir, ihr erreicht eine ganz neue Art der Freiheit. Wenn ihr nicht daran gebunden seid, immer wieder irgendwas neu zu kaufen, kauft ihr dein Glück und so weiter. Genießt das Leben, genießt, was ihr habt.
Richmond, California, a town where society's extremes can be spotted right from your car. This is cardiologist Jeffrey Ritterman's regular commute.
You can learn a lot about the stress and health outcome just from the neighborhoods you visit. In this neighborhood, the life expectancy is quite good, and most of the people are pretty healthy. And as we reach the top of the hill, it gets to be a little bit less privileged. And as we make this transition, the social status begins to drop, and correspondingly, in those areas, the health outcome is much worse. And these people are not going to have the same life expectancy as the people in the middle-class area we started in. People are on guard, people are vigilant. They're living a more stressful life. This is a community that produces high stress hormones in people, and over time, it takes its toll.
One of the most interesting new directions of stress research is taking the effects of stress down to a nuts and bolts level of how cells work, how genes work, that half a dozen years ago, nobody could have imagined.
The once unimaginable genetic structures called telomeres, which protect the ends of our chromosomes from fraying. As we age, our telomeres shorten.
What's interesting is stress, by way of stress hormones, can accelerate the shortening of telomeres. So the assumption is for the exact same aged guys, if you're a low-ranking guy who's just marinating in stress hormones, your telomeres are going to be shorter.
Dr. Blackburn is a leader in the field of telomere research.
We have 46 chromosomes and they're capped off at each end by telomeres. Nobody knew in humans whether telomeres and their fraying down over life would be affected by chronic stress. And so we decided we would look at this cohort of chronically stressed mothers, and we decided to ask what's happening to their telomeres and to the maintenance of their telomeres. What we found was the length of the telomeres directly relates to the amount of stress somebody is under and the number of years that they've been under the stress.
These women have shortened telomeres, decreased activity of this enzyme, and very, very rough number, for every year you were taking care of a chronically ill child, you got roughly 6 years worth of aging.
This is real. This is not just somebody whining. This is real, medically serious aging going on, and we can see that it's actually caused by the chronic stress.
You know, what are the active ingredients that reduce stress and that promote longevity? And compassion and caring for others may be one of those most important ingredients. So those may be the factors that promote longevity and increase telomerase and keep our cells rejuvenating and regenerating.
So perhaps connecting with and helping others can help us to mend ourselves and maybe even live longer, healthier lives. "20 years ago, Robert got a shocking preview of this idea. The first troop he ever studied, the baboons he felt closest to and had written books about, suffered a calamity. It would have a profound effect on his research.
The Kikarok troop is the one I started with 30 years ago. And they were your basic old baboon troop at the time, and which means males were aggressive and society was highly stratified and females took a lot of grief, and your basic off-the-rack baboon troop. And then about, by now, almost 20 years ago, something horrific and scientifically very interesting happened to that troop.
The Kikarok troop took to foraging for food in the garbage dump of a popular tourist lodge. It was a fatal move. The trash included meat tainted with tuberculosis. The result was that nearly half the males in the troop died.
Not unreasonably, I got depressed as hell and pretty damn angry about what happened. You know, you're 30 years old, you can afford to expend a lot of emotion on a baboon troop, and there was a lot of emotion there.
For Robert, a decade of research appeared to have been lost. But then he made a curious observation about who had died and who had survived.
It wasn't random who died. In that troop, if you were aggressive, and if you were not particularly socially connected, socially affiliative, you didn't spend your time grooming and hanging out, if you were that kind of male, you died.
Every alpha male was gone. The Kikarok troop had been transformed.
And what you were left with was twice as many females as males, and the males who were remaining were, you know, just to use scientific jargon, they were good guys. They were not aggressive jerks. They were nice to the females. They were very socially affiliative. It completely transformed the atmosphere of the troop.
When male baboons reach adolescence, they typically leave their home troop and roam, eventually finding a new troop.
And when new adolescent males would join the troop, they'd come in just as jerky as any adolescent males elsewhere on this planet, and it would take them about 6 months to learn, we're not like that in this troop. We don't do stuff like that. We're not that aggressive. We spend more time grooming each other. Males are calmer with each other. You do not dump on a female if you're in a bad mood. And it takes these new guys about 6 months, and they assimilate this style. And you have baboon culture, and this particular troop has a culture of very low levels of aggression and high levels of social affiliation, and they're doing that 20 years later.
And so the tragedy had provided Robert with a fundamental lesson, not just about cells, but how the absence of stress could impact society.
Do these guys have the same problems with high blood pressure? Nope. Do these guys have the same problems with brain chemistry related to anxiety, stress hormone levels? Not at all. It's not just your rank, it's what your rank means in your society.
And the same is true for humans, with only a slight variation.
We belong to multiple hierarchies, and you may have the worst job in your corporation and no autonomy and control and predictability, but you're the captain of the company softball team that year, and you better bet you are going to have all sorts of psychological means to decide it's just a job, 9 to 5. That's not what the world is about. What the world's about is softball. I'm the head of my team. People look up to me, and you come out of that deciding you are on top of the hierarchy that matters to you.
I would say what we've learned from the Whitehall study, from the study of the non-human primates, is the conditions in which people live and work are absolutely vital for their health.
So what do baboons teach the average person in there? Don't bite somebody because you're having a bad day. Don't displace on them in any sort of manner. Social affiliation is a remarkably powerful thing, and that's said by somebody who lives in a world where ambition and drive and type A-ness and all of that sort of thing dominates. Those things are real important, and one of the greatest forms of sociality is giving rather than receiving, and all of those things make for a better world. Another one of the things that baboons teach us is if they're able to, in one generation, transform what are supposed to be textbook social systems sort of engraved in stone, we don't have an excuse when we say there's certain inevitabilities about human social systems.
And so, the haunting question that endures from Robert's life work: are we brave enough to learn from a baboon?
Ja, die Sache ist jetzt, was wir mit diesem Wissen anfangen. Stress ist, haben wir gerade eben gesehen, auf Dauer extrem schädlich für den einzelnen Menschen und für die ganze Gesellschaft. Und es wäre so einfach zu beheben. Nehmen wir mal als Beispiel die ganzen Niedriglöhner. Die verdienen einen Scheißlohn, können sich keine Familie aufbauen und haben eigentlich immer Angst, nicht über die Runden zu kommen. Das muss geändert werden, ganz klar. Aber wie viel besser wäre denn deren Leben bitte, wenn wir nur mal anfangen würden, die mit Respekt zu behandeln? Ey Laia, komm mal her. Komm mal ran da. Ey, wie viel besser es denen gehen würden, wenn wir denen einfach nur ein bisschen mit Respekt entgegentreten würden. So ein bisschen mehr Empathie. Okay, du hast einen Leiharbeiter in deiner Firma eingestellt, für einen Monat arbeiten lassen und wieder gekündigt. Okay, aber dann sag doch wenigstens Dankeschön. So, ey, Herr so und so, tut mir echt leid, Sie kennen das Spiel, ich muss Sie wieder gehen lassen, aber trotzdem vielen Dank für Ihre Arbeit und vielleicht klappt es ja irgendwann nochmal mit uns. Ey Leier, brauchst mal immer wiederkommen, ist vorbei, gekündigt. Auch wäre es doch für jedes Unternehmen von Vorteil, diesen ganzen Stress mal rauszunehmen, weil doch dann auch eben gerade die Menschen alle produktiver arbeiten würden. Nicht immer nur mit Stress, mach das, schnell, schnell, schnell. So ein bisschen Gelassenheit würde uns allen so gut tun. Und was wir jetzt aus diesen Erkenntnissen machen, das hängt von jedem einzelnen Menschen ab. Ich kann niemandem befehlen zu sagen, ey, behandelt euch jetzt alle mit Nächstenliebe, seid lieb zueinander, macht das jetzt. Ich kann niemandem irgendwas befehlen, will ich auch gar nicht. Jeder Mensch muss sich täglich selber prüfen, wie er mit seinen Mitmenschen umgeht. Erinnert euch mal zurück an die NTE von ihm hier. Der hat ja gesagt, dass die NTE-Erfahrung ihm gezeigt hat, dass der Erfolg seines Unternehmens und wie viele Arbeitsplätze er geschaffen hat und wie groß das war im Tod für ihn gar keine Rolle mehr gespielt hat. Die einzige Frage, die er sich gestellt hat da, war, was war ich für ein Chef? War ich ein guter Chef? Habe ich meine Arbeiter korrekt und fair behandelt oder war ich ein Scheißchef? Das sind die Fragen, auf die es in dem nächsten Jahrhundert und in der nächsten Zeit ankommen wird. Was bin ich für ein Mensch?